Hey guys, tonight let's start with a story. In 1980s Lisbon, Auditor Alfonso uncovers the sea snake gang's money laundering at CCM, smuggling cash via the sea nymph and covering their tracks with heat-sensitive, do-not-ask ink, all tied to João being coerced by the gang over gambling debts. When Portugal joins the European community in 1986, the ring collapses and Alfonso chooses silence to protect the innocent. So before you get comfortable, take a minute to like this video and subscribe, but only if you truly enjoy what I'm doing here. Also, let me know in the comments where you're tuning in from and what time it is for you right now. It's always fascinating to see people from all over the world joining us. In 1984, Lisbon port was always shrouded in an impenetrable fog. At 5 in the morning, just as the church bells in the old town struck for the third time, the silhouette of the sea nymph emerged at the end of the breakwater. Large chunks of the ship's paint had peeled off, revealing the dark red with grain underneath, like a fish whose flesh had been gnawed away by the sea wind, leaving only its skeleton. Only the three gilded characters sea nymph at the stern retained a faint trace of faded elegance. Manuel, the navigator, held an unlit cigarette in his mouth, a cheap Lisbon light. The cigarette paper, dampened by the sea breeze, stuck to his lips. He stamped his feet under the lighthouse at berth 3, his heavy rubber boots crushing the thin ice on the ground with a crisp crack. This berth was a dead corner of the port, so deep that it could hide a small submarine 3 kilometers away from the fish market. On ordinary days, only abandoned containers piled up here, rusting, their walls covered with sailors' graffiti and gang symbols. He watched as the sea nymph turned clumsily, the waves stirred up by its propeller carrying dark brown silt, the unique color of the Tagus River estuary, mixed with wastewater from upstream industrial areas and dock garbage. Manuel cursed silently in his heart, his right hand instinctively reaching for the waistband of his pants, where a sharp folding knife was hidden. He had bought it with half a month's salary for his son's birthday, and now it was his only weapon. When the gang members found him last week, it was outside his son's school. The feel of the gun barrel pressing against his son's school uniform pocket, cold as ice, still lingered in his palm. "Your son draws well," the scar-faced man had said with a smile, handing him a crumpled piece of paper covered with a crayon drawing of a blue fishing boat. "Don't let the sea soak his dreams." The sound of the fishing boat docking was as dull as a distant cannon blast, buzzing in Manuel's eardrums. 3 men in dark blue overalls quickly appeared on the deck, each wearing a small copper anchor badge on their collars, the symbol of the Sea Snake Gang. Having worked at the port for 20 years, Manuel recognized it at a glance. Their faces were covered with oilcloth scarves soaked in fish oil, and the stench of oil drifted over, mixing with the saltiness of the sea, so pungent it made people want to vomit. Only their eyes were visible, cold as winter seawater, devoid of any warmth. They moved quickly to open the refrigerated hold, which creaked as it rose. Manuel caught a glimpse of a black waterproof tarp covering the interior, and from the corners seeped not the smell of fish, but a thicker, damp, dusty odor, the smell of banknotes stacked in a dark place. For heavy waterproof sports bags were lifted off. Each was bound with double-layer nylon rope, the straps cutting into the men's red shoulders, leaving deep footprints in the dock gravel with every step. Manuel counted the bags. 4, just as the gang had told him the previous week. He noticed that the sleeve of the man on the far right was torn, revealing a section of his forearm with a tattoo of half a black poppy, the other half hidden by his sleeve, a mark of low-level sea snake gang members who could only get the full tattoo after completing more than 10 safe transactions. "Business as usual," the leader said, removing his scarf. He had a scar on his chin, and his voice sounded like broken glass scraping in his throat. Manuel nodded and turned to blow his whistle. A silver van slid out from the shadow of the containers. No license plates, its windows covered with black tint film, its engine purring as softly as a cat. As the sports bags were loaded into the van, Manuel heard the dull clink of metal, the distinctive sound of bundles of banknotes. By the time the van disappeared onto the coastal road leading to the city, the fog had begun to lift. Manuel watched as the sea nymph sailed back into the morning mist, pieces of ice floating in its wake, remnants of the refrigerated hold's disguise. He stuffed the unlit cigarette into his mouth and chewed, the bitter taste of nicotine reminding him of his son's perfect exam papers in his school bag. Suddenly, his gums ached. At the same time, the revolving door of the Lisbon headquarters of the Portuguese Agricultural Cooperative Bank, CCAM, began to turn, letting out the creak of old metal. Marta stood behind counter 3, carefully polishing a black fountain pen with a flannel cloth. The pen was made of vintage celluloid, feeling as smooth as warm jade in her hand, with a tiny anchor pattern engraved on the cap, given to her personally by Mr. Leonardo 10 years earlier. Back then, she was a young girl fresh out of accounting school, her father having died in the street during the Carnation Revolution. It was Leonardo who had given her this job and helped bury her father. Her nails were cut short, and the pads of her fingers were calloused from years of counting money. When she polished the crevices of the pen cap, she would pause instinctively for 2 seconds. Hidden there was a little hand cream she had secretly applied, a birthday gift from her daughter, with a faint orange blossom scent. The ceiling fan in the bank hall turned slowly, dust covering its blades, casting flickering shadows on the floor like a group of trapped butterflies. The clock on the wall struck 8, its pendulum ticking, each sound like a countdown. When the first customer pushed open the door, he carried the salty stench of the sea, mixed with a faint whiff of marijuana, a smell Marta knew all too well. For the past 10 years, such fishermen had appeared at her counter every week. The man wore faded fishing overalls, his trouser cuffs still caked with dock silt, a hole in one leg revealing a dirty bandage wrapped around his ankle. He clutched a worn passbook in his hand, the fishing boat pattern on its cover blurred, its edges frayed from constant handling. As he handed the passbook through the counter, Marta noticed a tattoo peeking out from his sleeve, the outline of the Strait of Gibraltar, with a black poppy embroidered in the middle, its petals edged with silver thread, a mark unique to mid-level leaders of the Sea Snake Gang. "Deposit catch," the man said, his voice hoarse as if he had swallowed sand, each word scraping his throat. Marta nodded and took the black cloth bag he handed her. The bag was made of thick canvas, printed with the words Lisbon Fishery Cooperative, its corners frayed, revealing the cotton thread underneath. When she unzipped it, a smell mixed with seawater, fish, and ink wafted out. The distinctive scent of new, uncirculated escudos, freshly issued by the Bank of Portugal, their ink smell still strong. But the serial numbers on the banknotes were erratic, some starting with L, others with P, clearly from different batches. Several even had dark red stains, like dried blood, striking against the beige paper. When Marta's fingertips touched the stain, she suddenly remembered a rainy night 3 years earlier, when another such man had handed her a bag containing not only banknotes but also a blood-stained fishing net. Later, she learned it had belonged to a fisherman who had refused to cooperate with the gang. She took a deep breath to suppress the chill in her heart, her fingers flipping quickly through the banknotes, carefully feeling the edges of each one. The gang often mixed a few counterfeit notes with real ones to test her, and a single mistake would have catastrophic consequences. She counted the money skillfully, the feel of the banknotes under her fingertips reminding her of the days when she had helped her mother dry fish in the fishing village as a young girl. The counting machine made a monotonous, clicking sound, the numbers scrolling on the screen, finally stopping at a figure that would allow an ordinary fisherman to live comfortably for 10 years. The man stared at her hands, his eyes showing no expectation, only a numb scrutiny. In the upper right corner of the deposit slip, Marta gently wrote 3 words with that fountain pen. "Do not ask." The ink was dark brown, like dried squid ink, standing out clearly against the beige paper. When she handed the receipt back to the man, her fingertips accidentally brushed his. His hand was as rough as sandpaper, with fresh scrapes on his knuckles. After the man left, Marta locked the bag of money in a special safe under the counter. This safe had no number, and there were only 2 keys, one in her hand, the other in Vice President Joao's office. She looked down at the words on the deposit slip, suddenly remembering that when she had worked overtime the previous night, she had seen the same "Do not ask" on a slip from the previous week, faded almost to invisibility. The sunlight outside streamed through the plain tree leaves, casting dappled shadows on the deposit slip. Marta covered the sun with her finger. The dark brown words remained clear. She sighed softly, filed the slip into the folder by number, knowing that by the next morning, those 3 words would be gone as if they had never existed. And this money would never appear in any fisherman's account, just like the sunlight that had vanished in the sea nymph's refrigerated hold. Alfonso entered Cam's headquarters just as the morning rush was ending. A few businessmen in suits were still waiting in line, cigar ash on their cuffs, whispering about the Lisbon stock market. The tellers behind the counters kept their heads down, their fingers moving quickly between abacuses and account books, the clinking of abacus beads echoing like a dense rain. In 1984 Lisbon, computers had not yet spread to grassroots banks. Only the risk control department at headquarters had an old IBM computer that took 5 minutes to start up and operated as slowly as a snail. All accounts were recorded and verified by hand, thick ledgers piled in the corner of each teller's desk, their covers worn and peeling to reveal the craft paper underneath. Alfonso was dressed in a dark gray suit, bought specially for his transfer, the cufflinks made of pearl, left to him by his mother, slightly worn but polished to a shine. His leather shoes were also polished bright, tapping crisply on the marble floor, standing out amid the noise of the hall. Several tellers looked up at him curiously. Headquarters rarely had such a young senior auditor, especially one transferred from the rigorous Porto branch. He clutched a crumpled transfer order, stamped with the seals of both the Porto branch and Lisbon headquarters. As the youngest senior auditor in the bank system, his transfer back to headquarters was ostensibly to assist in auditing the agricultural and fishery credit situation in the Algarve region. In reality, however, the bank's risk control department had received an anonymous report alleging an abnormal surge in the loan-to-deposit ratio there, possibly due to irregularities. Mr. Alfonso? A man in a gray suit approached, wearing an administrative supervisor badge, its edges tarnished black. He was short, with a slight beer belly, his tie askew, the tie clip fastened to the second button of his shirt, looking somewhat absurd. "I'm Fernando, sent by Vice President Joao to pick you up." Fernando's smile was perfect, the corners of his mouth turned up just right, but Alfonso noticed he kept rubbing his wedding ring unconsciously with his left ring finger. A simple gold ring, its surface worn smooth, clearly worn for many years. His fingertips traced the ring repeatedly, as if relieving some tension. As Fernando turned to lead the way, Alfonso caught a glimpse of a white powder on the back of his suit jacket, like camphor ball dust from the archives. Apparently, this administrative supervisor often visited the underground archives personally. The office was on the 4th floor, facing the Tagus River, its large floor-to-ceiling windows spotlessly clean, offering a clear view of fishing boats and seagulls on the river. Vice President Joao's desk was made of Brazilian rosewood, so heavy it would take 4 men to move, covered with a dark green velvet cloth. On it stood a silver coffee set and a bronze ship model, the Sea Nymph, with the tiny words "Silva Family" engraved on its sails. In the corner of the desk was a family photo in a silver frame, its edges carved with delicate patterns. The photo showed a man in a Portuguese Navy uniform with the rank of lieutenant colonel, Joao's father, Leonardo, standing beside an elegant woman in a cream-colored dress holding a baby, the newborn Joao, and a teenage boy with features similar to Joao's, his late elder brother. "Please sit, Alfonso," Joao said, his voice as gentle as the Tagus River's current. He poured Alfonso a glass of port wine, its deep purple liquid glowing softly in the crystal glass. The situation in the Algarve is a bit complicated. He paused, tapping his fingers lightly on the desk. The fishermen's cooperatives there are very influential, with close ties to the local government, and the demand for loans has always been strong. Especially during the sardine season, we can receive hundreds of loan applications a day. Alfonso noticed that Joao's nails were neatly trimmed, but there was a faint trace of ink under his fingernails, as if he had just finished writing something important. Alfonso took the glass but did not drink. He placed the transfer order on the desk and pushed it toward Joao. I've seen the preliminary data. Over the past 3 years, small-scale fishery loans in the Algarve have increased by 300%, but the corresponding deposit growth is only 50%. Moreover, the repayment rate on these loans is surprisingly high, almost no bad debts, which is highly unusual in the agricultural and fishery sector. Joao tapped his fingers gently on the edge of the desk, his gaze drifting to the river outside. You know, the sardine industry in the Algarve has been booming lately. He paused. Fishermen's incomes have increased, so repayments are naturally timely. Additionally, the local cooperatives have a mutual aid system. If one family can't repay, others will help cover it. The explanation sounded reasonable, but Alfonso still felt something was off. During his time as an auditor in Porto, he had handled many fishery loans. Fishermen's incomes were highly volatile, affected by ocean currents and fish migrations, and loan repayment rates had always fluctuated. Data as stable and nearly perfect as that in the Algarve seemed more like an artificially created illusion. I'd like to see the specific account statements, Alfonso said, setting down his glass. All accounts labeled small-scale fishery loans starting from 1981. Joao's eyes flickered for a moment. Then he nodded. Of course, Fernando will take you to the archives. But I should warn you, there are a lot of accounts in the Algarve, so it might take some time. He stood up and pressed the intercom. Tell the archives to sort out all the Algarve fishery loan files and send them to Mr. Alfonso. The archives were on the basement floor, accessible via 2 narrow corridors with flickering incandescent lights and exposed black wires snaking along the walls. When Alfonso pushed open the iron door to the archives, a cold, damp air rushed out, mixed with the smell of moldy paper and camphor balls, making him cough twice. The archives were huge, half the size of a football field, with dense shelves reaching from the floor to the ceiling, filled with thick ledgers and deposit slips, some of the labels' handwriting blurred beyond recognition. Fernando placed a stack of thick ledgers in front of Alfonso, their covers made of brown craft paper, edges curled, with Algarve Fishery Loans 1981 to 1984, written in red ink. There are about 500 accounts here, all meeting the criteria, he said, pointing to a desk in the corner. A vintage solid with desk covered with scratches and deep cup marks. You can work here. Let me know if you need anything. As Fernando turned to leave, Alfonso noticed that his trouser cuffs were covered with the distinctive gray dust of the archives, unevenly distributed, as if he had been squatting in a corner for a long time. When Alfonso sat down, he found a thick cotton pad on the chair, emitting the smell of sunlight, as if specially prepared for him. He opened the first ledger, its pages yellowed and brittle as potato chips, liable to tear with a single wrong move. The account holder was Antonio Ferreira, address 37, Fish Market Street, Tavira Fishing Village, Algarve. The loan amount was 500,000 escudos for purchasing fishing boat equipment, with a detailed list of items attached: fishing nets, engines, navigational instruments, their prices clearly marked. The loan was disbursed on March 15, 1981, with monthly repayments due on the 15th of each month, never late for 3 consecutive years. Alfonso took out his pocket magnifying glass and examined the repayment records carefully. The handwriting was from the same person with a steady stroke, clearly a teller who filled out the forms regularly. He turned to the next page, which contained Antonio's identification information. The man in the photo had dark skin, deep wrinkles on his face, and a simple smile. But Alfonso noticed that the edges of the photo were blurred, as if cut from another document, and the last 3 digits of his ID number differed by only 1 digit from the account next to it, almost impossible in real identification records. He flipped through the second, third, and more ledgers. The account holders were different, addresses different, loan amounts ranging from 300,000 to 800,000 escudos, but the repayment records were identical, on-time, full monthly repayments, no delays whatsoever. Even stranger, the transaction history of these accounts was extremely simple. A fixed amount of money flowed in on the same date each month, exactly equal to the monthly repayment, which was then immediately transferred out, leaving the account balance perpetually near zero. Like the tides, Alfonso muttered to himself. The flow of funds was so regular, arriving like the incoming tide, disappearing like the outgoing tide, leaving no trace of real assets. He picked up a random ledger and flipped to the most recent page, discovering that most of the title funds were labeled as fish catch sales revenue, with the remittance accounts all being anonymous accounts at Lisbon headquarters, accounts without account holder information, accessible only by password. As the day grew darker, the archive's old incandescent lights cast a dim yellow glow on the yellowed ledgers, making the numbers look blurry. Alfonso rubbed his eyes and stood up to get some hot water. As he passed the shelves, he accidentally knocked a folder of deposit slips off the top shelf. The folder fell to the ground, spilling its contents, and a beige slip drifted to his feet. He bent down to pick it up. It was a deposit slip from 1983, amounting to 1.2 million escudos, labeled Fish Catch Purchase Payment. In the upper right corner were 3 blurry characters, as if written in pencil and lightly erased, only the outline of the character no distinguishable. "What's this?" Alfonso asked Fernando, who had just walked in. Fernando's eyes fell on the slip, and his face turned pale instantly. This must be a discarded slip. How did it get here? He reached out to take it. "Let me put it back in the discarded files cabinet." Alfonso stepped sideways to avoid his hand, examining the blurry characters closely. What do these 3 words mean? Fernando's Adam's apple bobbed. "I don't know. Maybe a teller's accidental doodle." His eyes darted about, unable to meet Alfonso's gaze. That night, Alfonso took the deposit slip home. He lived in an apartment building in the old town, with a view of Lisbon Cathedral's dome from his window. He shone a desk lamp on the slip, trying to make out the blurry characters, but couldn't. Just as he was about to give up, he accidentally pressed his palm against the slip. His hand had grown warm from flipping through ledgers in the archives all afternoon. A few seconds later, Alfonso's eyes widened. Under his palm, the blurry characters slowly became clear, dark brown strokes emerging from the paper to form 3 complete words. "Do not ask." He quickly moved his hand away, and the characters began to fade again, returning to blurry outlines after a few minutes. Alfonso's heart raced. He pressed his warm palm against the slip again, and the characters became clear once more. He replaced his hand with a cold glass, and the characters remained blurred. This was no simple ink fading. It was a temperature-sensitive, living writing. He thought of the title accounts, the abnormal loan-to-deposit ratio in the Algarve, and Fernando's pale face. A bold idea emerged in his mind. These accounts were not fishery loans at all, but a massive fund transfer hub. The funds flowing in on time each month were a disguise for repaying loans, while the true source and destination of the funds were hidden by these 3 words. Moonlight streamed through the curtain gap onto the deposit slip. Alfonso watched as the 3 words faded away, leaving only an ordinary beige slip of paper. He knew he had found a crack in the system, and behind that crack lay a secret capable of shaking the entire Portuguese banking industry. Early the next morning, Alfonso did not go to the bank. Instead, He went to the chemistry laboratory at the University of Lisbon. The laboratory was on the third floor of the main building, with a sign reading Biochemistry Research Laboratory on the door. A heavy fire door with a note. Experiment in progress, do not disturb. His college classmate Carlos was a researcher here, specializing in biochemistry. They had been roommates in university, often staying late in the laboratory together. Alfonso knocked on the door, and Carlos's voice came from inside. "Come in!" Pushing the door open, a smell of alcohol and reagents hit him. The laboratory was filled with various instruments, glass test tubes refracting colorful light in the morning sun. Carlos was wearing a white lab coat and goggles, looking through a microscope, his hair messy like a bird's nest, a faint stubble on his chin. When Alfonso told him about the deposit slip and his discovery, Carlos's eyes lit up. He took off his goggles, revealing bloodshot but sharp eyes. "This is fascinating, like something out of a spy movie," he said, carefully picking up the slip with tweezers, afraid of damaging the characters, and placing it under the microscope. "First, I'll extract a sample of the ink and analyze it with the high-performance liquid chromatography, HPLC machine." The instruments in the laboratory hummed softly as Carlos worked, chatting with Alfonso. "Do you remember the enzyme-catalyzed reaction experiment we did in university? We used bromelain to break down proteins, and the reaction stopped when the temperature rose, similar to this situation. Some biological enzymes are very sensitive to temperature. Changes in temperature affect their activity, which is probably the key to the character's color change. 2 hours later, the analysis results were ready." Carlos pointed to the graph on the computer screen, which showed several clear peak curves. "Look, this is the ink composition analysis. The highest peak is saffron extract, a natural pigment used by European nobles in the Middle Ages to dye fabrics, stable and resistant to fading. But the key is this curve," he said, pointing to a lower peak. "This is a special protease from the pancreas of deep-sea cod. It has a unique property. At temperatures above 25 degrees Celsius, it is inhibited, its molecular structure stable, and no reaction occurs. When the temperature drops below 20 degrees Celsius, the enzyme's molecular structure changes, activating it to break down surrounding organic matter. In this case, the saffron pigment." Carlos paused, taking a sip of coffee from the desk. "Simply put, during the day, the bank has heating, with temperatures usually between 22 and 25 degrees Celsius, so the enzyme is inhibited and the characters are clear. At night, the heating is turned off, and the temperature drops to around 15 degrees Celsius, activating the enzyme to break down the pigment, making the characters fade. So pressing it with a warm palm raises the temperature above 25 degrees Celsius, inhibiting the enzyme again, and the characters temporarily reappear?" Alfonso asked, his fingers tapping the desk unconsciously. His guess confirmed. Carlos nodded. "Exactly. Moreover, this decomposition is reversible. With repeated temperature changes, the characters switch between clear and blurred. The ink formula is extremely precise. The ratio of saffron extract to protease must be accurate to 1/10,000th. Otherwise, the characters either won't fade or will disappear completely. This is definitely not ordinary ink available on the market. It was specially developed, and the developer must have a deep background in biochemistry and materials science." As Alfonso left the laboratory with the deposit slip, he had a clear direction. Whoever had developed this special ink and used it extensively in the bank system must be an insider. His first thought was Vice President Joao. As the heir to the bank's founding family, he had the power and resources to pull this off. Back at the bank, Alfonso went directly to the archives, requesting to see all deposit slips labeled "Fish Catch Purchase Payment" from the past 10 years. Fernando tried to stop him, but Alfonso produced the authorization document from the headquarters risk control department, and Fernando reluctantly opened the file cabinet. The deposit slips in the cabinet were neatly arranged by year, each year's slips wrapped in craft paper envelopes, labeled with the year and purpose in Leonardo's strong, bold handwriting. Alfonso began searching from 1974, the year of Portugal's Carnation Revolution. On April 25th, a group of young military officers launched a coup, overthrowing the 40-year fascist regime and bringing a left-wing political party to power. The revolution changed almost everything in Portugal, and the banking industry underwent a major reshuffle. Many family-owned banks that had served the fascist regime were nationalized, their assets frozen, and their directors arrested. CCAM, however, mainly served the agricultural and fishery sectors, and Leonardo had secretly funded some left-wing youth before the revolution, so it was allowed to retain its family-run model, though it was subject to strict supervision. Headquarters sent a special inspector to review the bank's accounts every month. Alfonso found the 1974 envelope, which had a clear water stain, as if soaked by rain. He opened it. Inside, the slips were slightly damp, their handwriting blurred. After flipping through more than a dozen, he stopped. A slip dated May 10, 1974, 25 days after the revolution, for 500,000 escudos, labeled Fish Catch Purchase Payment, with a faint "Do Not Ask" in the upper right corner, barely distinguishable. The teller's signature was Leonardo Silva. At that time, he was still the bank's president, handling transactions personally. When he flipped to the 1975 slips, Alfonso stopped again. This slip was for 800,000 escudos, also labeled Fish Catch Purchase Payment, with the 3 characters "Do Not Ask" in the upper right corner. Fainter than the 1983 slip, but much clearer. He noticed the teller's signature, Leonardo Silva, a name he had seen in the bank's historical records, the founder of CCAM and João's father. Mr. Leonardo passed away in 1980. Fernando's voice suddenly came from behind. He was a legendary man. After the revolution, he saved the bank and helped many fishermen through difficult times. Alfonso turned to look at him. Is Vice President João his only son? Fernando nodded. Yes. Since taking over the bank, Mr. João has continued to follow his father's business philosophy. Did Mr. João live in Macau when he was young? Alfonso suddenly asked. While researching the bank's family history the previous day, he had noticed a 2-year gap in João's experience in the early 1970s, a time when Macau was an important Portuguese colony in the Far East and a famous gambling destination. Fernando's face turned pale again. He opened his mouth as if to speak, but only nodded. Yes, he worked at the Macau branch for a period when he was young. With that, he turned and hurried out of the archives, as if fleeing something. Alfonso's intuition told him that João's time in Macau must be related to this secret. He returned to his office and began flipping through old newspapers and magazines from the 1970s. In an obscure social news item in a 1973 issue of Macau's O Clarim, The Bell, he found what he was looking for: Portuguese businessman João Silva detained by Macau casino over gambling debts, later ransomed by his father Leonardo Silva. Beneath the news was a blurry photo: João, young and emaciated, being escorted by 2 men in black suits, his face haggard. Alfonso enlarged the photo and noticed that one of the men had a tattoo peeking out from his sleeve, the same as the fisherman on the sea nymph, the outline of the Strait of Gibraltar with a black poppy embroidered in the middle. The clues finally came together. In 1973, João had accumulated huge gambling debts in Macau and been taken hostage by a local gang. To save his son, Leonardo had had no choice but to strike a deal with the gang, using CAM's banking system to launder money for them. Leonardo had developed this special ink, using "Do Not Ask" as a mark to warn insiders not to investigate, while allowing the characters to fade automatically at night as temperatures dropped, avoiding leaving evidence. After the 1974 Carnation Revolution, Portugal's left-wing regime cracked down hard on gangs, which moved their money-laundering hub to Lisbon. Under the cover of the fishing industry, they transported cash from drug transactions to the port via fishing boats like the Sea Nymph, which was then deposited into anonymous accounts by trusted tellers like Marta. The funds were then split and transferred out through hundreds of fake, small-scale fishery loan accounts, eventually flowing into offshore shell companies. After Leonardo's death, João took over the bank and continued to maintain this fragile compromise. The do not ask marks were like a chain left by Leonardo for his son, and a token of the gang's control over the bank. Just as Alfonso sorted out the clues, his office door knocked. Vice President João stood at the door, holding a cup of coffee, a gentle smile on his face. "Alfonso, I heard you've been going through old records today. Are you having any trouble?" Alfonso looked into João's eyes, which were bloodshot and sunken, clearly showing signs of insomnia. There was a faint dark circle under his eyes, as if he hadn't slept a full night in a long time. Alfonso pointed to the old newspaper photo on his desk, which had yellowed and curled at the edges. "Mr. João, could you tell me about this experience?" 1973, Macau, the Pearl of the Orient Casino. João's smile froze on his face, as if frozen. He walked into the office and closed the door behind him. Alfonso heard a soft click as it locked. The air in the office suddenly became heavy, the sound of the ceiling fan spinning unusually loud. João walked to the window, his back to Alfonso, staring at the Tagus River outside. The sun shone on him, casting a long, lonely shadow. After a few minutes of silence, he spoke, his voice hoarse like sandpaper rubbing. "Some things are better left unknown." He turned around and placed the coffee in front of Alfonso. The edge of the cup was slightly hot. "Regarding the loan-to-deposit ratio in the Algarve, I can give you a reasonable explanation. Treat it as a policy tilt by the bank to support rural economic development. I've already spoken to headquarters. You just need to sign the audit report." Alfonso noticed that João's hand trembled slightly as he set down the cup, spilling a few drops of coffee on the dark green tablecloth, like dark flowers. "Do the fishermen know their accounts are being used?" Alfonso asked. João shook his head. "They are real fishermen, but they don't know that funds flow in and out of their accounts every month. We regularly give them a subsidy enough to improve their lives, and they never ask questions." Alfonso picked up the coffee cup but did not drink. He looked at João, a man trapped between gang violence and family ties, and suddenly felt both pity and anger for him. "What if I refuse to sign?" João's face turned serious, as if covered in frost. He pulled a leather wallet from his pocket, brown, its edges worn, revealing the leather underneath. He took a photo out of the wallet and placed it gently in front of Alfonso. The photo showed a little girl, about 7 or 8 years old, wearing a white dress with 2 pigtails, holding a paintbrush and drawing a picture of a blue sky and white seagulls. The little girl's smile was as bright as the sun, her features resembling João's, especially her eyes, as clear as the Tagus River's water. "This is my daughter, Anna, 8 years old," João said, his voice trembling. He reached out and stroked the little girl's smile in the photo, his fingers moving gently. "She loves painting. Her dream is to become an artist and hold an exhibition at the Louvre in Paris." João's Adam's apple bobbed, as if suppressing some emotion. "The gang is watching her every day. Last week, when Anna came home from school, there was a black poppy in her school bag. No note, but I know what it means." He looked up, his eyes filled with bloodshot veins. "Alfonso, I'm not threatening you. I'm begging you. If you expose this, the gang won't spare me, and they certainly won't spare Anna. You can't imagine what they're capable of." Alfonso looked at the innocent smile of the little girl in the photo, then at João's haggard face, a sharp pain in his heart. He suddenly thought of his own sister, who had also loved painting as a child but had died of the flu when he was only 10. Alfonso knew that behind the secret lay not only gang violence but also the helplessness and struggles of ordinary people. His next choice would determine the fate of many. In the spring of 1986, Lisbon was enveloped in a special atmosphere. Streets and alleys were lined with blue flags emblazoned with yellow stars, the flag of the European Community, EC. Fluttering in the spring breeze like a sea of blue, newspapers and television were filled with news of Portugal's impending EC accession, with front-page headlines such as Portugal of Europe and The Dawn of a New Era. Shop windows displayed EC-themed souvenirs, T-shirts, hats, mugs printed with the EC flag, and puzzles featuring the national flags of member states. People's faces were filled with excitement, and discussions about the single market and free movement could be heard everywhere. In the square of the old town, a stage had even been set up, where a band played cheerful Portuguese folk music, and children chased each other around the stage, holding colorful balloons. But in the underground archives of CCM, the atmosphere was extremely oppressive, in stark contrast to the joy outside. The incandescent lights in the archives still flickered, and the smell of mold seemed stronger than ever. Alfonso sat at the old solid wood desk, with thick transaction data reports spread out in front of him, marked densely with red pencil. He frowned as his fingers traced the numbers on the reports. Starting in March, the frequency of fund flows in those title accounts had dropped sharply. Only 2 transactions in March, compared to 15 in February. By April, the number of transactions had dropped to 0. He opened another folder containing Lisbon Port's arrival records. The sea nymph had last appeared on March 12th, and there had been no records since. Brussels supervision is coming, João said, sitting across from Alfonso, holding an EC financial supervision document. After joining the EC, our banking system will be integrated with other European countries, and all accounts will be subject to unified auditing. Those secret accounts can no longer be hidden. Alfonso did not speak. Over the past 2 years, he had not exposed the secret, nor had he signed the audit report. Instead, he had chosen a silent balance. He had not pursued the final destination of the funds, nor had he reported his findings to the headquarters risk control department. João, in turn, had allowed him to access all the data and even occasionally revealed some of the gang's movements. The gang has already started transferring funds, João said, his voice hoarse. They've moved their hub to Morocco. It's close to Europe and has loose supervision. Last week, they came to the bank to withdraw the last sum of money and returned this. He took a black fountain pen from his drawer, the same one Marta used to write "Do not ask," the anchor pattern on the cap slightly worn. Alfonso took the pen. It still retained a faint warmth, as if someone had just held it. "What about Marta?" he asked. As the directly responsible teller, Marta knew too many secrets. The gang would likely not let her go. "I've arranged for her to go to Brazil," João said. "She has a fake identity, and the bank has deposited enough money for her to live comfortably for the rest of her life. She worked with my father for 20 years. She doesn't deserve a bad end." Alfonso thought of the first time he had met Marta. A woman as calm as ice, counting money skillfully behind the counter, writing "Do not ask" on the deposit slips. He suddenly realized that Marta, like João, was a victim of this system, walking in the dark but never truly losing her way. That afternoon, Alfonso took a day off and went to Lisbon Port. He wore a dark blue jacket and a gray baseball cap, trying to look like an ordinary dock worker. Berth 3 was empty, with only a few seagulls circling above the breakwater, crying sharply. Scattered on the ground were tattered fishing nets and empty fish baskets. The nets were rotten, tearing at the slightest pull. He walked slowly along the dock, the gravel under his feet hurting the soles of his shoes. In the distance, several large cargo ships were loading and unloading goods, the roar of cranes echoing in the distance, mixed with the sound of waves crashing against the rocks. After walking for about 10 minutes, he saw an old fisherman repairing a fishing net, sitting on a worn wooden crate, wearing a sweater covered with patches. His face was carved with deep wrinkles, like wood weathered by sea wind and sunlight. His hands were calloused, black silt embedded under his nails. holding a thick needle and sewing the net's hole with hemp thread. The hole was large, as if cut by something sharp, with charred traces remaining on the edges. Alfonso walked over and handed him a cigarette. "Old man, take a break." The old fisherman looked up at him, took the cigarette, and Alfonso quickly took out a lighter to light it for him. The old fisherman took a deep breath, and smoke rings drifted slowly from his mouth. "Young man, are you here to find someone?" "Old man, have you heard of the sea nymph?" Alfonso asked. The old fisherman looked up at him and shook his head. "Never heard of it. But for the past few months, there has been an old fishing boat coming here to unload cargo. Not fish, but things wrapped in waterproof tarps, coming only at night, very mysterious." The old fisherman pointed to the sea in the distance. "I heard that last week, that boat was seized by Spanish customs in the Strait of Gibraltar. The crew all ran away, leaving only a boat full of empty boxes." Alfonso's heart skipped a beat. Spanish customs had recently stepped up efforts to crack down on drug smuggling. It seemed the gang's transfer had not gone smoothly. When he returned to the bank, he saw Manuel, the navigator of the Sea Nymph, coming out of Joao's office. Manuel had tears on his face, holding an envelope in his hand. When he saw Alfonso, he froze for a moment, then hurried away from the bank. Alfonso walked into Joao's office and found him packing his things. "Manuel's son has leukemia and needs money for treatment," Joao explained. "The gang used his son to threaten him before. Now that they're leaving, I gave him a sum of money to take his son to Germany for treatment." Looking at Joao, Alfonso suddenly felt that the chains around him were slowly falling off. On June 1st, 1986, Portugal officially joined the European Community, and financial supervisors from Brussels arrived as scheduled. They carefully audited all of Cam's accounts, including the former title accounts. But by then, those accounts had been cleaned up completely. The funds had long since been transferred overseas through legitimate trade channels, and the fake loan records had been replaced with real fishery loans. Joao had used the last sum of money left by the gang to issue genuine small-scale loans, helping fishermen in the Algarve purchase new fishing boats and equipment. The supervisors looked at the normal account transactions and left satisfied. Alfonso stood by the office window, watching the supervisor's car disappear down the street, knowing that the 10-year-old money laundering system had finally collapsed in the tide of history. And those do not ask secrets, like the fading of the special ink, were gradually forgotten. In the late autumn of 1986, light rain fell in Lisbon. The raindrops were fine as cow hair, cool on the face. Alfonso sat in the Navigator Cafe in the old town, a century-old cafe with ancient nautical maps and ship models hanging on the walls, filled with the aroma of coffee and cinnamon. In front of him was a cup of cold coffee, a thin layer of oil on its surface, water droplets condensing on the cup wall and dripping onto the table, forming a small puddle. The fine raindrops fell diagonally on the stone-paved road outside, washing it bright, reflecting the streetlights' shadows. In the distance, Lisbon Cathedral loomed faintly in the rain and mist, its dome wrapped in a thin veil. There were not many people in the cafe. A few regular customers sat at tables in the corner, whispering, holding that day's newspapers. Behind the bar, the owner polished glasses skillfully and gracefully. The clock on the wall ticked, its hands pointing to 3 o'clock in the afternoon. An old man wearing a black coat pushed open the cafe door and walked in. His hair was gray, his back slightly hunched, but his eyes were still sharp. The old man walked straight to the table opposite Alfonso, took off his coat, revealing a woolen vest underneath. Pinned to the vest's pocket was an old CM badge. "I'm Pedro," the old man introduced himself. "I was the risk control director at CCAM. I'm retiring next month." He ordered a glass of port wine, then looked at Alfonso. "You have the evidence, don't you? About those empty accounts?" Alfonso did not deny it. He took a stack of documents from his briefcase and placed them on the table. These are all the evidence I've collected over the past 2 years, including the ink analysis report, comparative data on account transactions, photos of gang members' tattoos, and records of Joao's gambling debts in Macau. Pedro picked up the documents and flipped through them one by one, his fingers turning white from exertion. "I've known about this for a long time," he suddenly said. "Mr. Leonardo came to me and told me everything. He said he had no choice but to save his son this way." Pedro's voice trembled. After the revolution, many fishermen lost their livelihoods. It was Mr. Leonardo who secretly helped them with money from the gang. Those do not ask accounts not only laundered the gang's money, but also saved many fishermen's lives. As risk control director, I chose to remain silent because I knew that exposing this secret would cause the bank to collapse, leave the fishermen without support, and the gang would just find another channel. Alfonso looked at Pedro, a man whose face was etched with the marks of time and helplessness. "What about now?" he asked. "The system has collapsed. So why are you telling me this?" "Because I want to know why you chose to remain silent too," Pedro said, looking into Alfonso's eyes. "You're the bank's best auditor. You have the ability to expose everything, but you didn't." Alfonso fell silent. He thought of the photo of Joao's daughter Ana, of Marta's back as she left, of Manuel crying while holding his son. "Because this isn't a simple crime story," he said slowly. "It's a deformed product of its time. In that turbulent era, laws and justice sometimes failed, and people could only find cracks to survive in the dark. Leonardo used the gang's money to save his son and the fishermen. Joao maintained the balance with silence and protected the people around him. Marta and Manuel were trapped in this, but never actively harmed anyone," Alfonso said, picking up the coffee cup and taking a sip. "If I had exposed this, the bank would have been nationalized. The fishermen who truly needed loans would have lost their support. Manuel's son might have lost his chance at treatment, and Ana could have been retaliated against by the gang." Pedro nodded, a look of approval in his eyes. "You're more mature than I thought." He took an iron box from his pocket and placed it in front of Alfonso. "This was left by Mr. Leonardo. He said that if the secret was ever discovered, it should be given to the person who could make the right choice." Alfonso opened the iron box. Inside were an old fountain pen and a diary. The pen was identical to the one Marta had used, the anchor pattern on the cap clearly visible. The diary's cover was dark brown, with 4 words written on it: "Silent Testimony." He opened the diary. Its pages had yellowed and become brittle at the edges. The handwriting inside was Leonardo's, strong and bold, with the rigor of a soldier. The first entry was dated October 15th, 1973, written in dark blue ink that had faded slightly. "Today, I brought Joao back from Macau. He was so thin, his eyes filled with fear. When he saw me, he didn't say a word. He just threw his arms around me and cried. To save him, I made a deal with the leader of the Sea Snake gang to use Cam's accounts to clean their money for 10 years. I know this was wrong, making a deal with the devil, but I'm a father. I had no choice. I asked an old friend in the laboratory to develop a special ink, writing 'Do not ask,' hoping that this secret would fade away with the ink and that in 10 years Joao would be free of this chain and become an honest banker." Alfonso flipped through the diary, which recorded Leonardo's inner struggles over the past 10 years. Entry dated June 8, 1975. "Today, I gave out subsidies to a group of fishermen in the Algarve, 20 families, 5,000 escudos each. One of them, a fisherman named Pedro, whose wife has lung disease and whose children need money for school, knelt down to thank me. As I watched his back, my heart felt like it was being cut by a knife. Using the gang's money to save good people, was this right or wrong?" Entry dated March 20th, 1978. "The Sea Snake gang is pressuring me again, telling me to speed up the fund transfers. I made an excuse to delay them. Their eyes were fierce, as if they wanted to devour me. I keep a photo of Ana in my wallet every Time I see her smile, I feel like I have the strength to go on. The last entry was dated July 20th, 1980, the day before Leonardo's death. I know I'm dying soon. João will take over the bank, and his burden will be heavier than mine. I only hope that one day, when the times change for the better, this secret will be treated with kindness. Those who remain silent are not cowards. They are waiting for the right moment. Alfonso closed the diary. The rain outside had stopped, and sunlight broke through the clouds, shining brightly on the stone-paved road. Pedro stood up, picked up his coat. I'm going to Brazil. Marta is doing well there. She opened a small bookstore, specializing in children's books. What about João? Alfonso asked. He will continue to run the bank, Pedro said. He has submitted his resignation to headquarters, planning to go to Germany to accompany Manuel's son during his treatment, then come back and be a truly honest banker. After Pedro left, Alfonso put the diary and evidence back into the iron box and locked it in his safe. He knew these things would never appear on a prosecutor's desk or be made public. They were silent testimonies, recording the darkness and light of an era and the complexity and warmth of human nature. He walked out of the cafe, the sun shining warmly on him. The air after the rain was particularly fresh, filled with the scent of soil and grass. On the streets of Lisbon, people smiled. Several children held small EC flags, chasing each other on the stone-paved road, their laughter clear. In front of a flower shop on the street, baskets of bright carnations, Portugal's national flower, a symbol of peace and hope, were displayed. An ice cream vendor pushed his cart past, the bell on it ringing ding-ling-ling, attracting several children. Alfonso watched this scene, the weight in his heart gradually lifting. Those past secrets, the transactions in the dark, the silent struggles, like the mist after rain, they gradually dispersed in the air, dispelled completely by the sun. He remembered a sentence from Leonardo's diary: "Darkness will eventually pass, and light will always come." Alfonso looked up at the distant Tagus River. Several fishing boats were working on the river, and the fishermen's songs drifted over with the wind, clear and cheerful. He knew that the ghost system that had operated in the dark for 10 years had been completely dispelled by the sunlight of the new era, and his choice to remain silent was not an indulgence of evil, but a respect for life, because some truths need to be remembered in the best way, at the right time. He turned and walked toward the bank, his steps firm. The iron box in the safe was his agreement with that era and his expectation for the future. In this new era full of hope, those do not ask secrets would eventually be replaced by speakable justice, and the waters of Lisbon port would become clearer and clearer.